meeting for the 10th of March 2016. I have a smaller group today, but we've got a few things on the agenda. Hopefully we can flick through them. Shall we review of last meeting? I seem to have deleted the last meeting things off the minutes. Last meeting we did, we didn't have a formal meeting. We talked about foundation strategy. That's all we did. Issue number 57. And let's, should we skip stand up? Does anyone want to do any stand up? I say we skip it for this one, just to move on, make progress. So let's move into the first item, which is issue number 59, which is in the TSC repo, flattening project scope, TSC, big changes in structure. So this is Michael proposing broadly that we basically wind back some of the umbrella program changes and moving working groups up to TSC level rather than CTC. So effectively making CTC a working group of the TSC, and yeah, basically focusing things back on core. So this is a fairly big shift from where we've gone. My concerns about about doing rapid pivots here. James, you apparently were having chat to Michael just recently. Do you want to speak to this item?
Yeah. So I had a concern initially with this because of the moving all of the working groups up to kind of the TSC level, right, instead of the CTC level, when those working groups were primarily being focused on core development. It just seemed to be adding more confusion than it was addressing, and also just really blurring the lines between what is the responsibility of the TC and versus the TSC. I'm talking about it with Michael after the TC call yesterday. It became really apparent that a lot of the working groups that we have on the core could actually be just kind of more informally redefined as teams. The LTS is an example. We don't have a formal LTS working group. We do have an LTS team and an LTS repo, and it works rather well without actually having to charter a working group. And that a lot of these other working groups, or, quite a few of them could actually just be unchartered as working groups and just established as teams. And that the ones that we keep as working groups, things like maybe the documentation, website build, those actually do make sense moving up to the higher level of the TSC given their scope. For example, the documentation working group is not just working on documentation in core, they're also doing documentation directly against the website, right? Putting out their guides and that kind of thing. And it makes sense for that to operate at kind of a higher level. Same thing with the website working group. Build is not just doing stuff for core, but also doing stuff for libuv, the testing, smoke testing, that kind of thing. So it does have a broader scope. If we recast this into not saying all of these existing work groups are moving up, but only a handful of the working groups, the ones that make the most sense, move up to the TSC level, and the rest of the work groups actually get unchartered and made into just regular teams under core, right? So that from that point on, a work group is always chartered by the TSC, whereas under core, we would just form new teams, if that makes sense.
Right. Now, the one thing work groups, like, say, for the LTS working group, it was kind of delegated the authority to, I don't know, decide when the LTS releases were going out, that kind of stuff, as opposed to going back to the TSC. I don't know if that affects that at all. That'd be the only question I'd have.
Well, the LTS work group is not an actual chartered work group. It's just an LTS team. The members from them happen to all be on the release team. So we can have some authority on when to actually cut those, and the TSC just basically defers to that team for managing that group. And like I said, it's worked rather well, even though we haven't had a chartered work group. So I think the opportunity here is actually to eliminate some of that perceived bureaucracy of having to form a work group, right, and having to go through this charter process. So we would only do that if it's a larger scope thing.
Yeah, lighter weight, as long as they can still do everything they need to.
Right.
Hey, I'm all for removing some extra bureaucracy. I don't mind. I haven't really read through all of it, so I'm not necessarily up to date on all the details. Yeah.
Would the teams still have their own policies for committing into the repo?
The teams would just fall under the TC process, so whatever the TC decides. The full working groups would have this whole, that they are autonomous. They could have their own process, right? But those would have to be chartered at a TSC level and reviewed there. If that work group wants to take some of the responsibility of the TC, it would still have to come to the TC and ask. Essentially, what this would end up doing would be the TC is like a work group for core, right?
Yeah, it's like a non-delegated working group.
I'm sorry?
It is responsible for all that stuff that is not delegated from core.
Right.
But I want to suggest that we take a step back because what I find confusing about this PR is that it kind of bundles two big changes. And one is the decision of the mission of the TSC and focusing primarily on core, right? And two is the restructuring to fulfill that new mission, I guess. So I guess once you let go of the idea of foundation hosting other project, the restructuring kind of makes sense. But so far we've been discussing the mission of the foundation and whether we should host projects. So I think this is almost should almost be two separate PRs in a way. So I mean, we should probably consider the idea of, okay, is our mission now to focus on core, because that's kind of the main discussion that we've been having, right? And then once we make that decision, what is the best structure to fulfill that objective?
Yeah, so I can definitely agree with that. Yeah, I definitely agree that it could be split up. It's probably will be easier to discuss if we split it up as well. So.
Yeah, that if we continue to tackle the what is the mission thing and what is our role here, then it should become clearer what we should do organizationally. I think Michael's just putting, he's just jumping forward too many steps for us, so it's all getting jumbled up. So we need to encourage him to walk back a bit. The mission thing. I mean, what I'm really concerned about here is the rapid pivots in mission. And this is largely being driven by board concerns about expansion or perceived expansion. And really it's we've gone extreme in one direction, and now we're supposed to go extreme in the other direction. I'd like us to be a bit more intentional and not so pivoty with these things. And also, I think we do need to be careful in going too hard back in the other direction of just saying that we're only about core, because my main concern there is that if we limit our perspective to just core, and the foundation or the board wants to expand beyond core, let's say NPM, or something else, big and significant that is beyond core, then it opens up justification to start a new TC underneath the board, and that's something I really want to avoid. I want there to be 3 groups in the foundation. There's board, executive, and technical execution, which is governed by the TSC. And I want us to try and make sure that we keep it that way, and we don't have multiple arms of technical execution, because it's just going to make things extremely difficult. It's going to put more of that technical control back into the board where I don't think it belongs, and it's just going to sort of mess up the structure that we tried to set up in the beginning. So that's my main concern with walking back too far.
I second your concern that this is a 180 degrees turn, right, from where Michael was pushing just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, and I guess if this is just about core, then I'd be starting to wonder what's the difference between the CTC and the TSC.
Exactly. So if we split the question up, and if we end up coming back to saying, okay, we're just about core, then maybe we don't need that split at all. We just have one group.
Right.
I think we should really focus on the mission first and ignore postpone the structural issues.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me.
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. I think they should just be addressed like separately. I see the problem that Michael's raising with like communication stuff is like an actual ongoing problem still. Like I'm not sure we should necessarily just shelve that. So
what's the specific problem, and how does moving it to the TSC from the CTC fix it? That's like, if I understand that, then I understand the move.
Yeah, I guess that in some respect kind of requires the TSC to take on that more communicative, like in between working groups and stuff role, because that's his idea to make it so that what's actually happening is like more understandable to people and to ourselves.
But what stops us from doing what needs to be done the way it is now? Like, I just come back to
nothing really, but very few people understand what's actually happening or what is actually being done.
The same set of people is involved in CTC and TSC, and everybody's swamped, right? So if you need to have a group of people focus on communication, it's really about having a group of people who can focus on that.
And I think that overlap between the CTC and TSC has also kind of helped drive some of the confusion about the TSC's role. Some of the concerns I've heard from others is that the TSC has this like deep knowledge of Node core, which structurally is actually not the case, but because of the overlap is sort of viewed that way, and so the relationship with other projects, it's like this question of why should Node.js be saying how Express is run, for example, even though from a technical perspective that's actually not happening, but that's sort of that perception, and I think the idea is to try and combat that perception.
Right. So, for example, this group should have representatives from Express.
Well, it would if Express was actually like a sub-project under the current rules, but it's not technically like a chartered. Is that the right word?
Yeah,
like
that's
sub-project.
sort of. It's not a top-level project. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like an actual top level project, so they don't get like a voting representative. Although we could maybe bring someone in. They're also like pretty early stages, so I'm
So,
yeah,
so
I'm not sure that's
here's a board concern, which I also share, which is when you start adding members from these disparate projects. If we were to bring in more projects, and you start adding members to the TSC, it dilutes the TSC's concern and attention away from core more, and it naturally makes the TSC a more expansionary body because it's made up of more and more people from the outside that naturally have an outside perspective. And I think the board concern here is that it's changing the mission of the foundation a bit too much, and it could lead to an Apache style situation where it's just constantly outward looking for new things. And I share that as well because I still I'd like core to be at the core of our mission. So that's one problem with bringing on additional members from these other projects.
Right. Yeah. I think that's sort of the opposite end of. So if you have that concern, you're not worried that it looks like the TSC is node focused, right?
And I think one thing that contributed to this confusion, people on the board and elsewhere, was actually going back to the communication problem. A number of people, actually myself included, thought Express was added as a top-level project, and it wasn't until later that I learned that it's actually just in the incubator. So I think it was like that early misconception, which was just a communication problem, sort of led to feeling some of these fears about the TSC growing too quickly.
Yeah, that's definitely something that the board picked up on because Express came as a bit of a surprise to some people, and they were like, "Whoa, hang on, what are we doing?"
Right.
Which goes back to my point from last week, which is like, we really need to get aligned on our mission. What are we trying to achieve here together? And so that when one arm of the organization does something, it can be justified according to that mission. And at the moment, we don't. We just are executing differently. Even the executive is executing on its own plans with regard to education and these events, and they're just happening. And it's not easily justifiable in terms of a central mission. They're just things that you do because you're doing them. So I'd really like us to have that sense of mission. This is what we're doing, which we just don't have.
Yeah, I think having the mission agreed and written down is a great starting point because it's the lens that everything, like you said, then when something happens, you can think, does it align with that? Yeah, okay, then we're not concerned. If it doesn't, then what are we doing?
Yes. So last week, I proposed that the starting with that mission thing, and Michael then took that and put it into his PR, but he also removed some of it. So which again goes to the confusion of doing it all in one go. So I'd still like to separate that out as a separate thing.
Yeah, so I would like to see some of the communication concerns that Michael is trying to address. I would like to see a better explanation of what they are, because there might be multiple solutions to these problems, right?
Okay, let's not bike shut on this too much because we don't have actionable work here, as far as I can see, except discussion on the PR. I'm still going to go back and try to pull that mission out of there again. I'm only just now catching up on my backlog of TSC level work, so I'll try and get to that as soon as I can. Is there any actionable items that anyone wants to discuss about this particular issue? Just to avoid going around in circles.
I think we probably just need to bring it back to GitHub, discuss it a bit more there. The concern about splitting the PR, I think, is very valid. I think we need to get a little more. have this notion of what would happen to these working groups become a little bit more crystallized and documented before we could really make a decision. But I think just bringing it back to GitHub, maybe take a few more iterations and revisit it next week.
I think yeah, like you mentioned adding the suggestion to split it. I think adding Alexis' suggestion to document what the problems are a bit better, so people can understand if this is the right solution or there's some other ones they want to suggest.
Oh, you have the proposal for the mission statement. Are you going to open a PR?
Yeah, I was supposed to do that last week during the week, but didn't get to it. So I'll prioritize that, and then try and focus that down to just that question. And then I really need to get the board involved in that discussion as well. I told them at the last board meeting I would, but I wanted to get a closer consensus here about that before we push it to the board and then expand out the discussion again. So I have to move on that in the next few days if I can. So I'll try. Okay, shall we move on? Suspect there's not going to be that much else to discuss once we move on from this. Okay, so the next one on the agenda is the 53, which is, I think, the guidance proposal section. This is guidance for new projects. I'm proposing here that we defer this discussion because it comes back to this same area of structure, expansion, mission. Do we even want to expand? Is it that kind of stuff? So it just seems like it's too many steps forward, and we need to put a hold on that and figure out this other stuff first. Does that sound right? Michael,
Yeah, it sounds like it's on the mission. The general consensus on how we're going to go about achieving the mission.
Yeah, I agree that we should probably defer it.
Okay, I think Michael, that's your PR. Are you okay with deferring that?
I'm fine. Like, I'm fine either way. Like, I think there's already something out there that people come to, so I wouldn't worry as much about updating it to be a little tighter. But on the same hand, I understand it's all linked together, so deferring is fine with me.
Okay. The last one was preferred meeting tools. I don't know if this should be on the agenda or not. It's been on the agenda for a few weeks.
We should probably remove it. Yeah.
Well, on this topic though, what's your Jeremiah, your perception of the YouTube live stream? How do you think that's going?
I think it's going pretty well. It's mostly what I expected. I watch a good amount of Twitch live streams, so I'm pretty familiar with how this sort of setup works. The only thing is it requires someone to have like a machine to do this on. Currently, that's my secondary computer. It's perhaps would be possible to do it on a main machine, although then you would have to record the desktop audio and your microphone. Currently, I have it on a separate machine where all the audio is just coming from Uber Conference, where I'm not actually picking my mic up on it so that everything's in sync properly. So it does require like an extra machine running somewhere, and there's potential that if I'm not around, someone else might need to try and do it or something like that. So it's still not perfect.
We should get someone else working on this as well.
Yeah. I can export like configuration and stuff. OBS runs on like almost any platform, including Linux. One big thing to note is I just use like a Node.js like image because I can't really screen cap Uber Conference for who's speaking, and that's because geolocation is shown if someone calls in with their phone number might be shown. So maybe there's like a better meeting tool, like I don't know if GoToMeeting's any better about that for showing who's like actually speaking, because I figure people might have trouble with that. And I don't really have like a good way of solving that otherwise, since none of these things seem to have like pluginable APIs or anything.
They're all terrible.
On a tangent, is Hangouts on Air, is like, I've heard that if you're a company, you can get more people. Can you pay money and get enough for what we need?
No.
No.
And so
No, it goes up to 15.
Right.
Sometimes we break 15 in the CTC meetings.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if it was a matter of money or just a hard cap. It sounds like it's a hard cap.
It's a hard cap, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And we never went with something like, I mean, Slack would have like the same problem with the new audio calling, like Slack or TeamSpeak or Discord or anything like that. And that's because sometimes people actually need to call in because they don't have good internet connections, and stuff like Uber Conference and GoToMeeting actually like has capabilities for that, where people can call in with real phones and not just computers. So yeah.
Okay. So maybe Jeremiah, I'll sync with you at some point and figure out how I can get set up with the tools just to add some redundancy, so that if you're not here, we're not stranded.
Cool.
Would it make sense to document that process publicly, like how to set that up so that hypothetically anyone could pick it up if they need to?
Yeah, I can work on that. I think like all the configuration for it's actually like exportable or can be like put in a Git repo of some sort, I think. So yeah.
The only bit is the connecting to YouTube. You need to be authenticated as the Node.js Foundation.
So that's not actually true, although it definitely does help. So about the Node.js Foundation thing, YouTube has this pretty great system where you can add like admins to channels really easily, and they don't actually need authentication to the main part, although they can do anything on the channel then. So that's good because you can actually edit like the stream title, but to actually stream, there's just like this key thingamajig that you need. You don't actually need authentication.
Okay, so anyone with that key can do it. You don't need to do anything.
Yes, but you won't be able to edit the stream title or moderate the chat or anything like that. We could probably just disable the chat in that case, I guess, but.
Okay. Well, I think we're getting somewhere anyway with better public participation. I'm sure we can still improve. Okay, let's move on to a time of public QA. See if anyone has any input that they'd like to ping us with.
So there is one person in the YouTube chat who's been asking some things. So one thing that they said was that they were pretty lost about what the flattening proposal was about until they actually listened to a YouTube meeting. So, one of our TSC meetings to get like context about why there were concerns and that there even were concerns about adding other groups. But they also say that they should be able to post that to the actual issue. And then they have an actual question.
So just on that one, I think we in general are doing a pretty terrible job of bringing outsiders along on the same journey that we're on, particularly at the TSC level. CTC, I think we're doing, like at the core level, I think we're doing pretty good. We could do better. Our troubles around LTS show that we could do better. But at the TSC level, like we've got a significant amount of churn, and we are even having trouble with ourselves keeping up with it all. And we're certainly not bringing on outsiders with it. So we need to do better on this area. I think it's a failing, and it's not a good one.
All right, and then their question is the TSC steering Node.js core or steering the Node.js ecosystem? I've never been able to figure that out.
We're still trying to figure that out ourselves.
Yeah. Initially, the impetus behind splitting them off was that we had very deeply technical core concerns, and then we had organizational concerns. And so this body is more about organizational concerns at the technical side of the technical execution side of the foundation. So there's the foundation, there's the board, there's the executive of the board, of which Michael is a part, and then there is the technical execution side of the project, and that's what the TSC is governing. But most of the things that we've been focusing on here are about organization and management at that level, rather than actual technical questions. So the TSC so far, and I don't think, according to the structure we've set up, should ever get involved in those technical concerns.
Right,
It's all
and
delegated to the CTC.
as a note, so the TSC is probably somewhat misnamed at this point, and the reason for that is that we started with it as the Technical Steering Committee, and that is what it is in the Foundation charter documents, and that is quite difficult to change, so we haven't changed anything about the name.
Yeah, and to be honest, there's so much flux that we ourselves have not figured out what we're doing. We just know that we can't mix up organizational management concerns with technical concerns, and I think we've done a good job at letting the CTC focus on technical concerns. I think that's the one win we have out of this, is that the CTC is a bit more focused. Are there any other questions or comments?
There are from the same person. 1 second. I might as well just read it off. Okay. I think stalled/stale info doesn't represent the Node.js community well. There are things that are sitting for a long time without updates. Code and Learn, for example. Code and Learn is something that Michael tried out around NodeConf EU and just afterwards for helping people understand what kind of went into Node core development, how to maybe get started, but I don't think that has really gone anywhere. So it says, Michael emphasized again on the CTC meeting yesterday that things are getting hard to manage, and he's proposed the new structure in an attempt to help. I'm very much for staying away from the pre-IOJS life where things move really slow, but are some initiatives biting off too much work right now for the amount of time the volunteers have to offer? I say that was the last question.
Yes. Yeah, I think we absolutely recognize this, and I think it's the responsibility of all of us here to push back on churn that impacts us particularly. So Code and Learn is an example of churn that is pretty much dead now. It was an experiment that was run by Michael. I don't think any of us had anything to do with that, and so we need to try and pull that back. Another one yesterday, Patrick Mueller was looking at the collaboration repo, or the proposed collaboration working group, and that seemed to have gone stale as well. So we do have trouble with trying to pull together all these disparate efforts, and that's what the proposal that Michael put up for that we were discussing earlier in this meeting was attempting to. It was one of the things it was attempting to address. But basically, yes, we all recognize there's a problem and we need to fix it somehow.
That looks like all.
Okay. Anything else anyone would like to discuss before we close out? Okay, let's finish off with 15 minutes to spare. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Right. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Call recording off.